Welcome to the third week of K&A Bible. You may remember that last week, Caden and I finally introduced ourselves to you. I'm sure you were all much anticipating when that would come. But we've decided that while we did introduce ourselves, we forgot a very important member of the cast, one that you don't see, one that does probably 2% of the actual work that gets done. I'm kidding, it's more like 97%. That would be our editor and filmer, Debbie. Debbie, if you could come up here, everyone can take a look at Debbie.
I'm a little surprised Debbie came and waved. We had to really pry for that, but...
Yeah, we had to really pry for Debbie to get up here. I mean, you would not believe the amount of time that it takes for us to record one of these. I mean, we've already been here for an hour, and most of that was getting Debbie up here. But welcome to week 3 of K&A Bible. Today we're diving into Acts 5, 6, and 7. So we hope you enjoy. Okay, Caden, last week you had talked about, at the end of chapter 4, that there were a bunch of people in the church that were selling their belongings, selling their property, and giving the profits to the church. You said this was a very happy ending to chapter 4, but that chapter 5 wasn't so happy. So what exactly did you mean by that?
Here in chapter 5, we have the story of Ananias and Sapphira, which I'm sure most of you know, but they saw everybody selling their property and giving the money to the apostles. And so they went and did that as well, except they went and kept some of the money for themselves. And then they were asked by the apostles, and they were like, hey, are you sure this is all the money that you got for it? And then Ananias was like, yeah, this is all the money. And then he fell to the ground, dropped dead. And then Sapphira was then asked the same question, and she responded with, yeah, that was all we got for it. And then, boom, she fell, zapped, dropped dead.
Got yoinked, yeah. So they both died because they lied to God. They lied to the apostles.
Yeah, don't do that.
It's a bad move. It's not going to end well for you. Then further into chapter 5, the apostles start doing what the apostles do. They start healing people, as is customary in the book of Acts. When something bad happens, something good happens. So Ananias and Sapphira die. The apostles start healing people, and a bunch of people come to faith because they're seeing what the apostles are doing. They're seeing the power of God in all of the healings. Then, as goes the circle, something bad happens, something good happens, then they're brought before, guess who? The Sanhedrin. Nailed that one. So they're brought before the Sadducees and all the Sanhedrin, and I messed up that time.
Yeah,
there you go. I messed up that time. So they're brought before the council, and they're like, hey, we noticed that you're healing people again and preaching the gospel, and I thought last time we had told you not to do that. And so, again, Peter was like, see, I remember that you told me not to do that, except for I'm going to do not that thing anymore. So I'm going to continue preaching the gospel. They're like, well, we really would like it if you didn't. So Peter responds very famously in Acts chapter 5, verse 29. Peter and the other apostles replied, we must obey God rather than men. So this reflects forward to Romans chapter 13, in which Paul describes to people that they should obey their governments, and that those governments are instituted by God, and so to disobey your government is to disobey God. This is kind of a foreshadowing to that, showing that you should obey your government up until the point where they urge you to disobey God. So that verse is very famous in discussions surrounding that circle. So after Peter makes his speech to the Sanhedrin, they are flogged. And flogged.
Oh,
they're whipped.
Oh.
Yeah, no, they do a vlog.
Yeah,
they're like,
yeah.
hey guys, welcome back to the Sanhedrin. We're here getting whipped right now. No, so they get flogged for their troubles, and then they all get together and rejoice because they all got to partake in suffering on Christ's behalf.
And they vlogged it.
Yeah.
And then in chapter 6, there are some widows that the church was supposed to be taking care of, and they were in need of some food because you need food to survive. That's how humans work. And the church was kind of neglecting them and not giving them the food. And they didn't know really how to distribute the food to these widows. So the church comes up with an idea of choosing seven 7 of these dudes, 7 of these men, to be in charge of distributing food to these widows. And of those 7 men are Stephen and 6 other dudes who aren't really talked about that much because they're kind of not as important as Stephen. It's kind of reminiscent of LeBron James in 2018 on the Cavs with all of his scrum nobody teammates. Shout out to Micah and Yvonne. They could probably name the other teammates, but nobody else probably could. But they go, and Stephen is sharing his faith with everybody. And for the 3rd time in this Acts series, the Sanhedrin.
You nailed it.
There we go. The Sanhedrin council decides, and they're like, hey, like, you know, don't talk about Jesus. And Stephen, being the W person that he is, says no. And then he gets arrested. And then in chapter 7, Stephen talks to the Sanhedrin, and he says a lot. If this was a text message, it would be one of those things where you kind of got to like click it and it brings you to a whole other page. It was so much. But Austin, do you want to talk about what he says?
Yeah, of course. So in chapter 7, like Caden said, Stephen talks to the Sanhedrin, and he does a lot of talking. He kind of goes through the entire story of the patriarchs and God's faithfulness. I read through this like 4 times before we were recording, trying to find a general theme, and I really couldn't. So I challenge you all to go ahead, read chapter 7, come back to me next week, and if you find what a theme was that I didn't catch, let me know. Yeah, so he gives a whole big speech, and the Sanhedrin didn't really like his speech that much. It wasn't very moving, and so, Caden, you want to go with Stephen's foregone conclusion?
He gets stoned.
Yeah, his speech may have been powerful, but it was not very effective in swaying their minds, so he got killed anyways.
So Stephen was stoned. He was killed. Very painful, I would have to assume. But W. Stephen, good
work. Unlike chapter 4, unlike last week where we had a happy ending, we started with a bad ending and also ended with a bad ending. So this was week 3 of our series on Acts. We hope that you've enjoyed this week of K&A Bible.
Before we go, it's been brought to my attention, so both weeks that we've done this, when the thing's over, everyone claps, for us, which we appreciate, feels good. We're also very embarrassed, but like we kind of sink down in our seats. But nobody I've ever seen hype up a pastor as he goes up to give a little sermon. So as Ross comes up here, everyone give a huge applause and hoots and hollers and cheer. Not for us, but let's go. Let's give let's give Ross that good energy and hype up Ross. Let's go. Thank you for listening to K&A Bible.